But why are these sorts of issues happening now? Why is it being raised now? And a lot of it is learning the lessons of the past, of which I'll come to in a second. But a lot of it is this idea and this concept of creating the right future, looking at these problems that all of our speakers have mentioned this morning, and thinking, well, how do we do it right? How do we focus our attention and our innovation and our imagination on the right future? So the learning of the lessons of the past, it's all about fear, isn't it, really? Unintended consequences. GM, is it all going to go and take over the whole plants of the world? Irreversible consequences. I mean, we're looking at some things in things like synthetic biology now, and consequences on humanity of artificial intelligence that are irreversible. Intended misuse, terrorist use of drones, and another disaster like asbestos, CFCs, BSE, biofuels, palm oil, PCBs. And in fact, we did an interesting thing once on irresponsible innovation. And irresponsible innovations were responsible innovations that went a bit wrong somewhere down the line, but were actually really created to be responsible. So it's interesting that a lot of these things were not malign, they just didn't go quite well as those people intended. But a lot of it is to avoid losing out. So this is GM, it's all about GM. Responsible innovation is all about GM. This idea is the public has handicapped our innovation. They've put European agriculture back 30 years. Although I did find that there's only a GM potato. After 30 years of GM in the UK, we've only got a potato to come. So we don't have the pests and we don't have the crops for the GM applications at the moment. So it's not quite as bad as we thought in the UK, as far as I understand. New technologies are the engines of growth. If only the public had better information, and the public are irrational. I have a whole speech, Niall, on the irrational, emotional public, which I can't give now, but I will do another day. But also this response, oh, my little clicks aren't happening, are they? Oh, no, that's going to mess things up a bit. I had invented it on the Mac, and of course you put it in Windows, and it never works. But this thought of the rise of the public, as you've talked about, people are getting more sceptical, more savvy, better connected. NGOs are more vocal, more effective, which the public wants. The NGOs are still the most trusted group in society because the public feels they have got their interests at heart rather than commercial interests or government interest of staying in power. But mostly, these NGOs really, and the public, are asking the same questions that everybody asked. I did a thing once where I related the concerns of scientists about science and the concerns of NGOs, and they're very, very similar. It's just that they may be expressed in slightly different language. Is it spiralling out of our control? Do they really know what they're doing, these scientists, these businesses? Will profit trump safety? That's the concerns that people do have. Now, I've worked a little bit in nanotechnology. There were concerns about control and making sure we can do the things we want to do with the new technologies that are genuine scientific concerns, not perhaps emotionally expressed concerns. But also, the public also thinking, crikey, we need all the help we can get here. These problems are too big for the old solutions. And we need to pull out all the stops to get ourselves out of this hole we've got in terms of climate change, food security, and these other things. People are very, very worried about these issues. But these things happening concurrently. These are happening side by side, these concerns. But innovation is global. And government and business need societal support to make innovation work. So a lot of the stuff that we're doing with the European Commission is we need responsible innovation for public acceptability so that we can flog them our products. But also, society needs government and business to do its job right, to have the right solutions to the big problems. So again, this whole area of if we don't do it, someone else will. The Chinese are going to do it and they're not going to be as responsible as us. But we're finding a lot of the Asian economies are, in fact, you knew, Barry, that the Chinese were among the first to start looking at responsible nanotech. So that, these sort of assumptions aren't necessarily true. And we need growth in all areas now to get out of this financial crisis. Let's just make growth the number one thing. Those sorts of things working parallel with Are we on this unstoppable progress treadmill? Do we really? Is growth at all costs? It's not everything at the expense of well-being. So again, these two things working together, making life difficult for us all. But of course, the innovation opportunity, the need to do more with less. I've got a great quote, I think I didn't put it in, with James Dyson. Now is the best time to be alive if you're an innovator. To do more with less is the greatest catalyst for innovation that you could possibly wish for. These grand challenges we've all talked about, this is an opportunity to think differently. Someone's saying a failure of innovation is a failure of imagination. So we can use our imaginations. These grand challenges stimulate us to use our imaginations. But using innovation appropriately. We just used to have a laugh about the nano water that was marketed in the Far East, that the water, the hydration went into the body quicker with nano water. What is that about? So, you know, appropriate use of innovation. But whose idea is the right solution? If you look at GM, there are, you know, some people don't believe that that is the right solution. Some people think it's the only solution. How to create the best environment for responsible innovation to prosper. So we wrote a piece for a report for the European Commission where DG Research and Innovation, who stimulated the work on responsible innovation, wanted to try and flog it to other DGs, and they asked us to write this report that you can get on the, in fact, I think it's about still first on the Google list if you put responsible innovation. So what does it actually mean then? What does it actually mean responsible innovation? Because there's loads of definitions, and a lot of them are, you know, academic definitions which are a bit dreary. This one is the UK's most favourite definition of the moment for interest. Responsible research and innovation means taking collective care for the future through stewardship of innovation in the present. So basically, innovation appropriate without causing more problems than you solve. And if you're looking at research, money, the EPSRC, the ESRC, a lot of the research councils now, and certainly Horizon 2020, have got responsible innovation boxes. And often they mean engagement of stakeholders, but you will be rewarded if you think through these things better through these tender processes. They are really expecting you to jump through different hoops in the next few years, and you'll start to see them in the tender processes. And here's another definition I'm going to give you, which came up with Solazyme. Ecover, who you all know make very green cleaning equipment, cleaning materials, they were using allegedly synthetic biology. They're creating a new organism, a Solazyme-produced organism, to create an algal oil that they could use to replace palm oil. And they had 127 NGOs write a letter globally in the big promotion. Ecover must not use this extreme genetic technology, sort of GM-based. Now, I think it probably wasn't in the end. But what also happened was that Ecover, the feedstock for the algal oil was going to be unsustainable sugar crop, and therefore there was a huge environmental, a bigger environmental footprint to use the algal oil than they thought. But also there was some, you know, difficulty about, well, actually you should coconut oil, but actually coconut oil is better used for food. So there was a huge discussion, and Ecover were very, very rocked by what they thought was replacing palm oil, and everybody would think that they were fabulous, to find that they were castigated globally by a bunch of NGOs, and it was in all the press. So they used our principles for responsible innovation: innovate for social benefit, take accountability, consider all impacts, and ensure stakeholder involvement and feedback, show radical transparency and disclosure. I termed this radical transparency myself, so I'm interested to see it popping up from time to time. So that's how it appears to a business like Ecover. These are the things they need to do. Now, and this is based on our principles for responsible innovation, which they didn't tell me they were using it. They didn't tell me that actually it would be distilled by that, but we were very pleased and proud of that. So, there's a James Dyson quote. So these are the principles for responsible innovation. I just want to very quickly run through with you. They've not just come from my head. It has been a multi-stakeholder process starting, Barry was on that, in responsible nanocode. How do we develop nanotechnologies responsibly and use nanotechnologies responsibly? So we started there, and we've done a number of initiatives since then, and those little logos up there are the inevitable acronyms of the Framework 7 projects that also have been involved in looking at responsible innovation. So there's quite a movement there, particularly in academia and through the research and the focus of research, but it's going to get out there to businesses as well. So here's principle 1 of the principles for responsible innovation. But it's about innovation for social benefit. It's focused on solving a problem, fulfilling a need which delivers tangible social and/or environmental benefits in addition to commercial goals. But here's a few quotes from some people that we consulted as part of the joint of this. This is not necessarily something that's coming to a surprise to a lot of people. This is my favourite from a retailer. Please don't bring me pointless products. But he says that actually you get a lot of this. Lots of scientific products coming to them with no great benefit to their customer, but a lot of great science, a lot of great tech, really exciting. We can do this now. I don't want those. Give me a product that offers real benefits. There's a critical lack of ambition in long-term R&D, says an institutional investor. Where are the companies, what are they doing to find more innovating solutions? A civil society group, look, we need much richer picture of benefit over other options, not just sales patter. Are they just doing this for the profit or the fun of new science? Now, there's been a lot of public dialogue done in this area of innovation and responsible innovation in various areas. That's the worry that the public have. Actually, it's just about making money out of us or just about having real fun on the science front. Why are you doing this? Who will benefit? Is it worth it? And that's the fundamentals of the concerns about the focus of, especially some of these very spooky end technologies. I'm fed up of fighting my way through impenetrable science from companies to find the benefit to my customers, says the retail technology specialist. So the sorts of questions you'd be asking if you were developing a product, a new innovation in this area. What problem exists? In what specific ways is it a superior solution? Is it efficacious over existing technology solutions? There are social, ethical, environmental benefit, cultural benefit, economic benefit. And have these benefit effectiveness claims been substantiated? I was pleased to hear what Tim was saying this morning about now really substantiating your hunch that in fact corn was incredibly, from an ecological point of view, a huge benefit. Now, what happens, if you were inventing yourselves today, you'd be doing that as part of your existing R&D processes. And we'll come in a little bit to some of what those might be, but the problem is that always arises, do others agree that this is a benefit? And this is where the stakeholder views, the stakeholder involvement comes in. And have independent bodies been involved in assessing benefit and effectiveness? You've got the Carbon Trust with your work. In fact, I use the DuPont Nano Risk Framework, which was a joint venture between DuPont and Environmental Defence Fund in the States to think about the safety and assessment processes necessary for nanotechnologies. A great joint venture between civil society and a company. So again, what processes are in place? The second, principle 2, the consideration of social, ethical, environmental, economic risks and impacts. I mean, this is the big problem. This is the bit about don't cause more problems than you solve. So the organisation anticipates, is responsive to these sorts of issues. We need to see that they've thought through and mitigated potential risks, but no one even talks about it. So these are the retailers, the investors, those sorts of people who you're trying to sell your products to. They don't have any sort of equipment to have that conversation with you, and no one ever brings it up. So what is the system for managing risks? And that's where responsible innovation came from, actually. A risk-based thing. We don't want another asbestos, as well as we don't want another GM. No one expects individual companies necessarily to do it alone. But we want to hear about that they're thinking about the wider implications of what they do, said the institutional investor. However, my friend just got, I think, about 8 million quid from an institutional investor in synthetic biology, and nobody ever asks any question. Are you going to make any money? Yeah, thanks. Here, yeah, I can have some money. So yeah, what they say and what they do is a different matter. But we want to know you've anticipated risks. Acting as if they don't exist is unhelpful. But what about the social impacts? Who will be advantaged and disadvantaged? And what we're asking, and what this whole area is asking, is you to think about these things in advance. Now, you would think that you do, and you do think of some of them, but you don't think of all of them. How have stakeholders contributed to this view? Because the thing is, there's a great one in synthetic biology where they invented a product to sense arsenic in the wells of Nepal. They got a load of money from the Research Council. Great idea. You know, it's, but what they hadn't actually done, they hadn't spoken to the community. So when they realised that, in fact, the women of Nepal spend about 4 or 5 hours collecting wood to cook their food, they're going to need an extra hour and a half to gather the wood to warm up the synthetic biology sensor. It's just not going to happen. Now, you know, you could have saved a couple of $100,000s of our money if you'd gone to those communities and thought about how they actually lived before you developed the solution. Does it do what it aims to do? This is the nutraceutical stuff. There's a lot of these future foods that are promising an awful lot, and you will be scrutinised a little bit more about whether it does what it says on the tin. Do we need it or want it? The human health and safety impact assessments, you know, they're going to, oh, there you are, there's your framework. These are going to have to be more, they're going to have to be different depending if how innovative and novel the sorts of processes are that you're inventing. The environmental impact assessment and ongoing monitoring. A lot of the work about environmental impact assessment for Ecover, for example, was the fact that this destruction of the rainforest by using sugar for the feedstock for the algae. I mean, those are 3 or 4 steps back, and yet that is a serious problem for their business. Ethical concerns, you think ethical concerns, but this concern about nutrition replacement instead of real food, the knowledge and information for users of something. This also applies to all sorts of things like robotics. This is partly as well genetically modified insects or whatever. So some of these areas are your food areas, some of them are other people's areas. Social impact, big problems with impact on livelihoods, perhaps looking at synthetic vanillin and those types of areas. The problem that has arisen with NGOs is actually the impact of developing world farmers. They're going to be, their livelihoods are wiped out overnight. So again, what are you replacing with your new ingredient, your new product? What of the impact of that you might not have thought about? And cultural impact, bizarre cultural impacts that are actually quite dramatic sometimes and do also cause significant impacts that may be problematic. Principle 3, this is the big thing. If you're doing Horizon 2020, involvement of stakeholders in the process. So I'm just going to flick through these because we're quite rushed, but a lot of this is about how to involve the outside world in thinking through these things with you, rather than doing perhaps market research a little bit later on. The sort of areas that you can involve stakeholders with. Would you really involve stakeholders in very early stage R&D? You probably wouldn't. A lot of companies really wouldn't that early. Only when it gets, you know, into something that they start to involve them. Now, there's a lot of innovative work going on at looking at problem solutions and problem needs very early on. But again, this idea of do others think it's a solution? Have you talked to wider groups like NGOs? Do you even, I mean, from a pure public acceptability thing, have you actually done your due diligence? Do you know what the issues they are going to be raising that might be part of your a problem for you in the future? Which is why I think the DuPont did that. So all of these areas, but not just about communication. And this is where I totally agree with you about communication. But it's not everything. So it's a triangle actually. We put a thing in the middle, so it's a sort of triangle. So communication is one thing. It is essential to communicate what you are about because, I had a great quote somewhere along here. If you're in a vacuum, there's a vacuum of information which is credible and serious, and the bloggers are the ones that are ruling the world. Don't be surprised if the world thinks like they think, because what you're doing is sitting back in your office going, they shouldn't do that, honestly, they really shouldn't, they should be more scientific. But nobody actually goes out there and does it themselves, perhaps Science Media Centre might. So the area here, we're looking at what processes are in place to involve stakeholders, and this is the big thing. How has the organisation responded, this cogitate bit in the middle there, what issues remain unresolved? So how are you going to communicate, how are you going to listen, and how are you going to work together with others as equals? And just, okay, I'm going to go out of this because my iWatch is buzzing to tell me that I'm over my time. Governance essential. This is where these new technologies themselves, this is my favourite quote actually. Everyone goes, how do we restore trust in technology? And Baroness O'Neill says the answer is pretty blooming obvious. First, be trustworthy, and second, provide evidence that you are trustworthy. And I think that's the fundamentals of responsible innovation. It's not about the communication, it's about doing the right thing in the first place and telling people about it. So I shall flick these now, because I've gone on too long. It was 20 minutes when I presented it to myself. So again, this idea of governance and being involved in governance frameworks, which has happened a lot in nanotechnology, all sorts of organisations involved in the development of new governance mechanisms. And nanotechnology has been a bit of a poster child, hasn't it, for doing it right. And the final one is this radical transparency, because actually it's the key to trustworthiness. Do we have a choice? I always think of it as actually this, show your workings. My little kid and his maths, that you haven't got the answer until you've shown your workings. It's not enough just to have the answer, because no one knows that you've actually done the work. So I think there's a little bit of an analogy there. How do we know people are telling the truth? Because we never see any sort of basis for that. We never see anything. So when we did this project on transparency, which Barry was involved in again, we were surprised because, in fact, the NGOs, I'm going to flick through this, the NGOs and the businesses were not as far apart as everybody thought. The businesses felt that, oh, they're going to make us, give up our IP and share commercial pressures, but they didn't, did they? They weren't as far away as you would expect. So this idea of radical transparency that Ecover themselves are really looking to follow and be very bold in will be the key to the trustworthiness of these novel technologies. So I've rushed through this very quickly, but there's quite a sort of movement now to think through the implications of these principles for responsible innovation. And if anybody wants to be involved in that, and I know a couple of people already are involved in that, please do get in touch with me. Keep a lookout for it in the sort of areas of work that you're involved in the research, and in the Innovate UK we'll be doing quite a bit of work on that as well. And perhaps sort of, if you have any chance to have a look at our principles for responsible innovation on our website, then we would be really, really interested to know what real practical people think about it, because I spend too much time with academics and theoretical people, and we really need to bring it to life, and we would like your help with that.
I really would like to try and squeeze in a couple of questions if we can. For
Sorry about that.
No, that's brilliant. So I'm sure we've got a few, and it's like Neil potentially is.
I'm going to be a little bit nasty now. You talked about radical transparency
Indeed.
as the bedrock of trustworthiness.
Indeed.
Is that actually true? Because if you trust someone, then you hope they're going to do something for your benefit, but you don't really know that. Therefore, I would like to propose a process of open translucency.
You're supposed to be the business person, not the academic coming. What is open translucency?
Well, I don't know. You tell me.
I think that's right. I think that's right. And that's where I was going to pick up on you, actually, about the public are emotional. The public, we all are emotional. However, they have a very strong, rational reason for believing what they believe. A, because of the information that they've got. B, because their inclination to trust and not trust. So this idea of the emotional public having irrational decisions, it's actually not true at all. The public have very rational decisions of what works for them and their family. And by treating them as emotional, then you communicate in a way which could be very, very unhelpful. So.
The reason I brought it up is we had a discussion with a customer 2 weeks ago. based on trust and based on transparency, and they were hit exactly with that question. Does 100% transparency breed trust?
Well, that's the whole point of this What's Fair to Share project.
Exactly.
What do stakeholders need to see? What do they want to see and what do they need to see? And you'd be 100% transparency, you can't possibly be 100% transparent, it's daft. But what will give them confidence? So this project was building trust, building confidence in innovative technologies, what stakeholders expect and what companies can respond. And that's about what gives you confidence, what will make me look trustworthy in your eyes.
Exactly, and what it brings down to is that you can have as many academic discussions as you want to, but at some point you have to park it and move on to the real world.
Totally.
And that's where we are.
Totally.
One more question perhaps before we break for lunch.
Great,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you very much.